Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, we're going to be discussing kind of an introduction to biology. Chapter is called Evolution, the Themes of Biology and Scientific Inquiry. In this chapter, we're mostly focusing on things like the foundations of biology, the foundations of science, scientific method, and what is science. So, a great foundational discussion in this chapter for all science courses, really, but especially in the biological sciences. Now, since this is our very first chapter, I chose the quote, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. And this is your start. This is your start to become great. And I expect great things out of you. So if I can expect your best, expect greatness out of you, then we know that if somebody, as long as you know somebody's expecting that out of you, then you know you need to give that. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at and how I kind of design my courses, I always look at various chapter objectives, and these are kind of what I base my examinations on. Now, I can't ask on everything, but I will ask from these. Kind of think about these as a great way of verbally study guide. What I would say is, like, can you actually describe the seven commonalities of life or the commonalities of life that I give? Can you do these things? Can you know why? Can you describe why? Can you be able to differentiate these things? Can you do what this says verbally without looking it up? And if you can do these things without looking it up, then you know it. A lot of students come into science thinking they know how to study. What they are doing is they frequently confuse um, familiarity with knowing, with knowledge. Don't confuse I'm familiar with the things in the notes to that I know what these things are. So as we begin, we're going to begin with biology, but we actually begin with how life is transformed. Now, how life got here in the first place is a little bit of, from a scientific perspective, we have hypotheses, we have things that we attempt to try to explain it, like abiogenesis. Whether life came here by natural means or whether it was created or however you think life may have gotten here, that is inconsequential to this statement. That evolution is a thing that starts at the beginning of life. And life had to be here first. And that's kind of the quintessential thing that a lot of people seem to equate that evolution is life got here on its own. Now, abiogenesis, life from non-life, is an idea postulated by people who accept evolution. Evolution is a scientific fact and a theory that we will be discussing, and I'll help you guys kind of understand why it can be considered both. But it transforms life. All life on Earth, from its very beginnings till today, is being transformed. And this is really our core center of all biology. In fact, a famous geneticist, Theodosius Dobzhansky, once said, Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." We can understand the concepts and make them understandable without accepting evolution, but the whys behind them is, well, why is it here in the first place? Is evolutionary biology. Now, biology is the study of life, and it gets its name from a two-part, from a word bios that means life, and logos that means the study of. So as we're dealing with like Latin roots here, bios, logos, the study of life. So when we study life, we are literally studying what does it mean to be a living thing, what's going on in living things, the stuff we're thinking about and studying living systems. So life itself, we generally know what it is when we're looking at it, but do we ever stop to ask ourselves what is life? Now, there's a question I'm going to pose to you. Now, normally what I do, in case the reason I have this is that in my classrooms I normally teach in, we have these little stations with dry erase boards. Now, you may not have that, but what I'm going to ask is you guys take like, I want you guys to jot down real quick, pause after this, and just write down 5 reasons you may think that this is not alive. This green dry erase marker is not alive. And let's see what you guys get. Okay, so if you pause and you waited, the minutes it took you to write down 5 reasons you think this isn't alive, there may have been many things you put. And most people probably put some things like it doesn't reproduce, it doesn't breathe, it doesn't do certain things. Well, some of the things you put are characteristics of you as a livingism, but not paramecium, not bacteria, not single-celled eukaryotes, not multicellular microscopic organisms, not things that we would all think of as life. So what is it that if I say, okay, this thing, it obviously has a few characteristics. So what we're going to do is with your list of 5 reasons you think it's not alive, I want you guys to check it across this list of 7 things. Now, here's 7 things that we could say that only life has. Well, the first one is found outside of life. Life, and among other things, non-life, has order. Order is a characteristic of matter. Now, not all matter is alive, but I'm going to say order is kind of the prerequisite. It's kind of the thing that if you have it, you can have life. Is sometimes how I like to think about it. Now, why do I say that? Well, a well-ordered structure has the ability to do some things that non-ordered structures can't. But if we think of order, for example, the combs of a honeybee's hive are very ordered, very well structured, but not alive. Structures, bubbles are very well ordered, but not alive. And there are things that have order. A donut is ordered, but not alive. This marker is extremely well ordered, but it is not alive. But life has order. Now, you look at yourself, you look at any living things structurally ordered. Now, so does this marker, structurally ordered, very well ordered. Now, so this is kind of the thing I would say life and non-life share is order. Now, order helps us put things like energy into a more usable manner. We basically are able to create order out of chaos in life. Now, adaptation. Evolutionary adaptation is something that only life can do. Only life adapts. Only life. Now, a rock cannot adapt. It's going to be subject to the laws of chemistry and physics, and it can't adapt to that. It cannot do, if it gets acid rain on it, it can't do anything to adjust that. It can't respond chemically inside to buffer that out. It cannot adapt in an evolutionary way to evolve legs and walk away from the acid rain or be able to do things. Now, when we look at this seahorse and its evolutionary adaptation to hide amongst the coral because it looks so much like it's camouflage. Now, response to its environment. Now, we might say response in the environment. One of the things we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we have regulation, and that's one of the last ones I actually have. But responds to the environment. Here we have Venus flytraps, and an insect lands on it. There are 3 hairs on the sticky pads of a Venus flytrap. If it trips 2 of them in the right amount of time frame, these things will slam shut and devour, essentially eat the insect that lands in it that's unfortunate to land in there. So it's responding. Now, if I shine a light in your eye and your pupils constrict, that would be a response to the environment. If you walk out in the heat and you sweat, that's a response to the environment. You have the ability to do that. And only living things can directly respond to the environment because they have the ability to do this. The most simple organisms on planet Earth respond to the environment in some way. For example, even sponges will adjust their pumping rate to the currents and the amount of material that is in the particular ocean at that time. So even the most simple animals on planet Earth that are multicellular animals still respond to their environments and adjust what they do accordingly. Now, reproduction, and I'm going to say reproduction and the ability. It's kind of like you have the right to remain silent, but you didn't have the ability. You have the ability to reproduce. Now, I've never reproduced. I do not have children. By the end of the semester, you're probably going to think, thank goodness this man doesn't have children, but I've never reproduced, but I do have the ability. Um, the ability to reproduce is of one of your own kind is something that only life does. Rocks don't make more rocks. Rocks may get busted and splintered and fractured into smaller rocks, but they don't produce new rocks. It's just not the way rocks work. So, as we think about some of these things, growth and development, organisms can grow and they can develop. You started out as a single cell. That single cell became many cells. Those many cells are now trillions of cells, and you developed, you grew up into as a child, to a teenager, through puberty, to a young adult, and now are capable of sexual reproduction. And that is a very long drawn out process of growth and development. We grew and we developed, and now we are very different from how we started life. Like how a seed is very different from the sperm and the egg that was united to make it, and the seed grows into a seedling. The seedling grows into a tree, and the tree produces sperm and egg to make new seeds and start a new life cycle. So they're very different stages that we could actually see and point to, and we would look at these things. Energy processing, something else that we can see. We eat food, we convert that food into energy to make our heart beat and our brains work and our muscles work, and we do things with it. We process it. We use the energy to make things like neurotransmitters and hormones and parts of a cell. We use it to do things. And then we also regulate. Regulation. Now, here we have this jackrabbit who could use its ears to thermally regulate, to cool off or heat up the body, depending upon what is needed, using it as a thermal regulating organ. And you can do that regulation. I regulate my blood glucose levels. If I this morning, if I ate a bagel with some peanut butter on it, the sugars and the fats and the content that was in my bagel would have to be regulated back to normal again. And that's what my body did. My body would have had to increase energy usage to consume some of that to keep my glucose levels normal. So if we look at this dry erase marker, it has order, obviously, but it does not adapt. This guy is never going to become, no matter how long I let it sit, it's never going to become a fountain pen. It's never going to become a laser it's never going to become a wood burning pen or a carving tool. It's never going to become anything that is even somewhat remotely similarly in shape, but different purpose. It's always going to be this, okay? It may break down if we burned it or destroyed it, but it's never going to become anything different. It can never respond to the environment. Now, here's the thing. If I leave this lid off and I let this sit off, it will dry out. The ink will dry out, and it will be useless to me. Even if I leave the cap off, it can't regulate the loss of ink. I have to make sure I put the cap back on, okay? It cannot reproduce. I could put this with another marker, put it somewhere in a dark room, give them a few minutes, and go back, and they're not going to be pregnant with a new baby marker. And I'm not going to come back sometime later and give birth to a baby marker, a little tiny little baby marker. It's not going to happen. It doesn't grow. It doesn't develop. It doesn't reproduce. I can try to feed it, and it's not going to be able to consume food and actually have a metabolism. If I stuck a thermometer in it to measure its metabolism, I could directly try to measure, is it consuming chemical energy, which would be an indicator that it has a metabolism of some kind. You won't find that. It's going to be the temperature, basically, that the room it's in is. And it can't regulate. Again, it can't have no ability to prevent from losing ink. Like, if I stuck it somewhere where it might lose ink, it's not going to put the cap on itself. It's not going to regulate. It's not going to be able to do something to roll into the shade to keep from losing ink. It can't do anything to regulate itself. It's stuck wherever I put it. So it's I always use that because why I always use it because I always had a green dry erase marker with me in a classroom. And so you'll see these kinds of things, okay? So these are the things that all life do, okay? All life has these abilities. Now, when we look at life, we could say because of these things that there are 5 underlining themes that life has. And we're going to go through theme 4 today, and then I'll save evolution and science for the next lecture. But organization is a big thing. Order and organization. See, order is kind of a prerequisite for life because this helps us create order out of chaos. Organization, order, and structure. What I like to say is our cells have this ability to tame the molecular storm within because it's well organized. And it can tame the molecular storm. And when we tame this molecular storm within, we are able to harness it. It is like when man first learned to somewhat tame lightning a little bit. And like with lightning rods, and we use lightning as and protected ourselves from it and things like that. We understood it. Well, the storm here is we can organize the molecular storm and make it work for us with organization. We have information, which we're going to talk about is DNA. We have energy and matter, which we can transfer energy and matter. We have interactions amongst organisms and their environment and organisms to other organisms. In biology, too, I'll talk about some organismal interactions between different species where we have things like parasitism and things like that. And then evolution is one of the major underlying themes. Now, as we talk about it, when it comes to the fact that we have organization, we have what's called the hierarchy of life, or so-called levels of organization. And then we're going to talk about emergent properties that fall out from these. And I like to describe emergent properties. Emergent properties, we now know, are pretty critical and pretty important to understand things like the complexities of evolutionary biology, the complexities of why the brain works. Basically, we might say intelligence is an emergent property from neuron interaction. And cells being the basic unit of life. I might just say cell theory, okay, which we'll talk about more later on. That will be a chapter on cells. When we get into the chapter on cells, we'll talk about basic cell theory, and we'll discuss that. Now, what I want to do is we're going to build up a living ism. And then we're going to look at that. We're going to go to all life on planet Earth. Let's start from the smallest thing to all life as we know it and build it up. And how could I build it? Well, we're going to start with the smallest things we really know of, and that's subatomic particles. Now, the 3 important subatomic particles, though there are more, are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now, there are particles inside the particles, which you may have heard of, but we don't care about those right now. What we're going to be worried about is protons, neutrons, and electrons. These are subatomic particles. And what subatomic particles are, being our protons, neutrons, and electrons, are the building block of atoms. And an atom, the atomic level of organization, is the simplest, smallest, stable unit of matter. Now, here's what's cool, guys, is this is the smallest thing that we could say is matter. The smallest thing that we think of that gives matter its fundamental properties. The smallest stable unit of matter. If I have 1 atom of carbon, it will have the same chemical properties as 1,000,000 atoms of carbon. Now, once I take 1,000,000 atoms of carbon and I arrange them in a certain structure, then we get new properties. But 1 atom of carbon versus millions of atoms of carbon, each atom has the same properties. Now, if I have a chemical level, which we might say molecular, chemical compounds, the chemical level, this is when I have 2 or more atoms and I bond them together. And molecules are just a bunch of atoms. They work together and they make something that's different. Now, think about this. The protons, neutrons, and electrons on their own have their own properties, which combine result in the atom having its own properties. And each atom in a chemical compound has its own properties, but combined makes the chemical compounds, the molecules, the chemicals, having their own unique properties. Now, what is very interesting here is I can take some chemicals. For example, you probably heard of hydrocarbons. And if I take a bunch of, let's say I take 3 hydrocarbons, and I get a molecule, another chemical compound called glycerol, which is a fat alcohol. And I take this fat alcohol glycerol and these three things called hydrocarbons and put them together. I have a macromolecule, a large molecule that's made up of multiple smaller molecules. And these are called macromolecules. That would be like a triglyceride, for example. And these macromolecules have different properties than the molecules or chemical compounds that made them up. And then I can take these macromolecules and I can combine them together and make an organelle, like the organelles of a cell. These are very small cell structures. For example, you have different macromolecules associated to the nucleus that you do in the Golgi, that you do in the mitochondria, that you do in the endoplasmic reticulum. And these things are organelles. But if I take all the organelles, which are made up of macromolecules, I can build up a cell who are all of these atoms, molecules, organelles, all this working together. Now, guys, everything I've talked about from 5 up to 1 is not alive. But for some reason, when these things all come together and coalesce, we get life. The structure and the organization that we have now can produce the properties of life. And you think about this. Why? Well, I mean, it's just interacting levels of organization. And how does that create what we would know as life is a fundamentally bizarre question to ask and try to understand. But why is life? Is a hard one. And but we think about it, guys. The simplest unit of life being a cell. All these things are working together. But now I have biology. Everything about this is either biochemistry, organic chemistry, chemistry, and physics. Okay? Everything above that is chemistry. Then we hit the cell and we have life. And these cells can come together, work together, and make something called a tissue. Now, think about the skin tissues that you have, epithelial tissues, muscle tissues, connective tissues, neural tissues, muscle tissues. These tissues that we have in the body, they are a bunch of cells working together. And they're able to come together and create new properties and do different jobs. And if I take a bunch of different tissues and I throw them together in a meaningful way, I have an organ. For example, a stomach may contain all the different tissues, or it will in some parts anyway. So an organ in the body may be built up of all the different types of tissues in one organ. Okay? And in different places, in different areas and locations to allow it to do its job. And that organ will be part of an organ system, like the stomach as an organ is part of the digestive system, an organ system, a group of organs who work together. So the liver and the intestines and the everything else, the salivary glands and the teeth and the pancreas are all working together to digest and absorb nutrients. As an organ system, our digestive system has a job to do. It is the organs of that organ system that allows it to do it. It's the tissues in the organs that allow it to do it. It's the cells in the tissues that allow it to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you're going to see is, guys, it goes all the way to that chemical level. But now, those organ systems are all made up in an organism, in us, a human, an individual living being. An animal. Now, this is the realm, basically, when you think of organism, organ systems, organs, tissues, and things like that. That's what we think of as organismal biology, zoology, human anatomy, and physiology. And cells kind of play in that role. So this is all a level of biology, like my undergraduate degree was organismal biology. Now we deal with populational levels. Now imagine if you're out in your neighborhood. All the people in your neighborhood is a singular population, a group of the same organism. All the humans that live in that neighborhood is a population of people. Now we know that in my neighborhood there's dogs. We got 3 in this house. There's 3 next door. And 2 doors down there's even a pig. They have a pet potbelly pig 2 doors down from my house in my neighborhood. So, and there's dogs across the street and things like that. And cats. People have cats in our neighborhood, I know. Potbelly pigs, as I know. Birds. And so we have all these pets in this community. And that community that we live in is made up of as humans, dogs, and cats, and birds, and potbelly pig. And then just outside of our neighborhood, before you turn in, there's a farm where they raise some animals and they probably eat them. So, but that potbelly pig, I hope they never drive that potbelly pig back there. And they, so, um, so this community is a little bit more of interacting populations. Community ecology is a very difficult area because you are talking about various interacting populations. For example, how the coyotes and the rabbits interact in a single population, predator-prey. Okay, predator-prey interactions. That would be a thing from community biology, community ecology. And then ecosystems. This is all the communities in an environment. So when you're talking about like ecosystems, communities, and populational biology, you're dealing in a realm called ecology, as well as biosphere. All life on Earth. Now, biosphere is the hardest one to study. How does all life on Earth interact in this massive thing to some degree that it's hard for us to imagine that a human being living in Gray, Tennessee might affect a population living on the other side of the world, perhaps. And to some degree, we know we do because of things like what we might release carbon-wise. Our carbon footprint may affect help to affect and contribute to global temperatures increases. Okay, global warming, climate change. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into photosynthesis chapter. We'll talk a little bit about climate change and things like that. Now, what I want to help you guys understand is that we went from very big here at the bottom. We're very small at the top, very big at the bottom, but there are interactions along the way. To build a biosphere, we needed ecosystems. To make ecosystems, we needed communities. To make communities, we have populations. To make populations, you needed organisms. To make organisms, you need organ systems and organs and tissues and cells and organelles and macromolecules, chemicals and atoms and subatomic particles. And these things are all interacting. I mean, ultimately, it's hard to have one without all the others. And you remove something and bam, we don't have it. Now think, if we didn't have subatomic particles, you could never have atoms, which means you never have anything, okay? So it's kind of hard to imagine. But what is happening here is that there are interactions among these various things. And what is so fascinating is it's called an emergent property. Now, let me kind of just set emergent properties. Now, it's a good bet that many of you like to play video games, whether it's on a PC, whether it's on a gaming system, console, or mobile games, or what have you. Now, somebody coded that game, and when they coded that game, there's a complexity of code. Codes can get pretty complex, especially for very large games. Like I love RPGs. I love games like Fallout 4. Love the Fallout franchise and universe, Skyrim, things like that. Now, when you think, guys, about what it takes to get that world built and the code, and then we all know that Bethesda games, it wouldn't be a Bethesda game if there wasn't bugs in the game. And these bugs are not, is it a bug or is it a feature, is really the kind of joke people make about Bethesda games. But these bugs are not intentional. They are there. They are an emergent property. Okay, bugs in a complex game like Fallout games are an emergent property. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, emergent properties at each level of organization, as I write code and the code is interacting with other code, these interactions produce new properties that were never there at their previous level. And I like to think this is somewhat like they're unintended consequences of interactions. So as complexity goes up, the properties result. For example, if I take hydrogen, which is a gas, 2 hydrogen atoms, which is a gas, And I take oxygen, which is O2 actually, and I split these in the right way. I take 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. Both of these are gaseous states in their normal everyday situation. And I O2 and H2, those are gases. I take and split the O2. I take the hydrogen, stick it to 1 oxygen, make a liquid water. Water is definitely liquid most of the time, and it's different than the sum of its parts. Water is different from the atoms that make it. For example, if I take sodium, which is a metal that catches on fire when it touches water, and chlorine, which is a gas that will poison you, and combine them together, I make table salt, which is different than the constituents it's made up of. We might say that emotions and intelligence are actually emergent properties of neural connections, okay, in the brain. So emergent properties are fundamental, guys, into understanding how the things happen. See, one of those things that happens, people often say that, well, evolution can't be true because second law of thermodynamics, but emergent properties happen. And this is a major component to evolution, is as you get more than one interaction, you get new levels of things that come out. As the complexity increases, you get new things. And as in new interactions between genes. Okay, so this is kind of crucial to life, emergence of life, evolution, things like that. And it helps to us to understand why some of the bad arguments against evolution are so bad. Now, something also I want to talk about is that in biology, we talked about order. Now, we might be thinking, let's say, for example, that so right now, there's a vehicle I really want to buy. I want to buy a brand new V8 Dodge Challenger. It's got to be red. Now, I already have a red 2011 Silverado sitting outside right now. I still drive it. I'm not getting rid of my pickup truck. I'm keeping it. I got it back before I ever got married. I got it back. I was a single man living on my own. I got this thing, and I'm keeping it. My wife's in agreement with that. It's like, yeah, we need to have a truck so we can haul things, and just got to keep it, keep it taken care of. And let's say I have a red pickup truck, and then I finally get my red Dodge Challenger. Now, let's say that my wife says, honey, we got to go to Mize's to pick up a load of mulch so that we can do our landscaping. I'm not going to take my Dodge Challenger to go pick up a load of mulch. I'm going to take my red pickup. But if she's like, honey, let's go for a drive. Let's go out and drive around. I'm going to want to take my Challenger, man, so I can drive around and have some fun. Why is this? Well, it's because the structure of those vehicles are different. See, the truck is really built to haul stuff. And a muscle car is built around to drive around. It's built to get there fast and look good doing it. Okay, so different jobs for different things. You can tell that a truck is really good at hauling because it's got a bed at the back. We would say form fits function. The structure of something determines how you use it. You wouldn't want to eat peas with a hammer, and you wouldn't drive a nail with a fork. And it might be that you want to eat peas with a spoon because of the structure of the tool. And you could look at a tool and know what it's kind of for. Form fits function is a great way to say this. Idea is that levels of organization, structure and function correlate. Okay, whether it's at the cellular level when you look at neurons, or even the organelle level when you look at mitochondria, the cellular level at neurons, the organ level at structure of bones, and even the body level at birds. When you look at organismal level of birds, is everything there is set for flight. The wing organs, their limbs, the bones, the mitochondria, and the neurons, all of these are reflective of what they do. If we look at leaves, leaves are thin and flat. Why are they thin and flat? That is, makes it good at capturing light by the chloroplasts that are inside of it so it can do photosynthesis. Okay? So, as we think about it, form fits function, a great thing. Very important thing. You never get away from this idea in biology. Form fits function, okay? Now, a really big one A really big one. You'll never get away from this. You better make sure you know this. I would say tattoo this on your wrists. This is a thing you're guaranteed to see on an exam with me anytime I ever test on it. Anytime I ever teach this, you're going to see it. Prokaryote versus eukaryote is a very big thing. A lot of students come out of general biology courses not knowing this. And if you go take microbiology and you don't know this, they're going to say, why don't you know this? They're going to come back to me and fuss at me about it. I want to make sure you know it when you get there. Now, there are two types of cells out there. If I want to break down all cells, I could put them into two types. And that's it. Eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Now, what does eukaryon mean? Eukaryotic, prokaryotic. Eu means true. Karyon is a word that means kernel. The kernel in this case is referencing the nucleus. Now, true, karyon, nucleus. We have a nucleus. Karyon actually references the word called kernel. So this is a word, guys, that is literally telling me that I am a cell that has a nucleus. And usually the largest, most visible, easily seen organelle. Now, there are membrane-bound organelles, and the biggest one is usually going to be the nucleus. With some exceptions out there, maybe, but usually not. Okay. Now, prokaryotes. Pro means before. Karyon, kernel, or nucleus. This means you come along before the nucleus. These are the earliest cells. These are bacteria and things like that. Now, what I want to make you guys think about is they are very small, very simple. If you look at it, look how much bigger this eukaryotic cell is next to this prokaryotic cell. Eukaryotes are usually much larger, more complex than a prokaryote is. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus, and they won't have any other membrane-bound organelles in them. Now, this is going to be things like my bacteria and then a group called the archaea. Archaea are the really ancient, like archaeology, meaning the study of ancient time periods, ancient cultures, ancient civilizations. Archaeology, archae, meaning very old. These are very old groups, prokaryotes and the bacteria, which are the really widely displayed one. These are the ones we generally know a lot more about as bacteria, like things that cause strep throat, something like that. Now, if you're a eukaryote, then you're going to be either a plant, an animal, or a fungi. Plants, animals, and fungi belong to the group called the eukaryotic cells, called eukarya. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what I want to help you guys understand is, of course, the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and you need to make sure you do understand that. I always ask it on, I'm going to basically say, good chances if you see prokaryote versus eukaryote in a chapter, it probably will be on the test because it is one of those critical things that anybody coming out of general biology must know. Now, information. Information is going to be mostly dealing with DNA. Now, we'll talk about genomics a little bit. Genomics is the understanding of one organism's genetic information, your genome. And as we think about this, we have in cells, we have never seen a cell that doesn't at some point have DNA in it. Now, your red blood cells, they contained DNA early in their development. They lose their nucleus before they go out into the generalized world. But yeah, your red blood cells, as you go look at them, have no nucleus in them, but they did at one point. But that DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, that is your genetic material. That is the material that your parents, your dad produces sperm, your mom produced an oocyte, that sperm cell fertilized that oocyte, made an egg. That egg became a zygote. That zygote develops into an embryo. That embryo eventually becomes a human that is born and develops and has DNA in it. You get one chromosome from your mom and one chromosome from your dad, and these chromosomes can have hundreds of thousands of genes on them, hundreds or thousands of them on those, but you get one from mom, one from dad. And in them are your genes. And your genes, what is a gene? Gene is just something that codes for a polypeptide. It's really all it is. But they are going to be coding for the building molecules in a cell. And you got them, you inherited them. and it helps control your development, helps control the maintenance. Genes, which are inherited, actually help direct how you develop. What's so cool is you can turn genes on at certain times of development and turn them off at certain times. There's many genes you have that you only use them for the first weeks, and that's it. They're turned off. You only used it when you did early development, and some a little bit later. But there are some genes that you only needed them when you were an embryo. Okay, that's pretty fascinating. But you have them still, but you only needed them for that earliest part of your life, but you need them. So you have them. And they control your development. They also control your maintenance. So you constantly can replace dead cells and things like that and turn things on when you need to. Now, DNA, for example, helps code for characteristics, and evolution works on this DNA over time. Now, what we could say is, guys, is that evolution is the change in allele frequency over time. An allele, now let's say here that each of these organisms here have alleles. Some of them have very low antibacterial resistance, antibiotic resistance rather, sorry. And some of them have very high antibiotic resistance. Now, if we take and put an antibiotic here, the only ones that will be left is those that had high antibiotic resistance. And then the final population will have high levels of antibiotic resistance at the end. Now, evolution works on genetics over time to change that population. Here, this population had greater variation. Some were very low, some were middle, some were high. By the end, most of them are quite high in this. Why? It is because after an antibiotic was put onto this population of bacteria, we are left with only very highly resistant. Now, this is actually why, if you are ever given antibiotics to take, and let's say your doctor says, hey, here, I need you to take this antibiotic. You got a bacterial sinus infection. And you take it. You've been on it for like maybe for half a week. You're like, man, I feel really good. I'm going to stop taking it. Don't. Never go without completing an entire course of antibiotics. This is how we get antibiotic resistance, is not completing a course of antibiotics. Never should you ever go without completing the entire course that your doctor gives you. Okay? I don't care what it is. Now, if it makes you sick, go to your doctor and tell them, hey, this makes you sick, and they can change it, but don't go without completing your course of antibiotics. Okay? So this is evolution right here in action, and there's a great video out here that kind of depicts what happens with this. And since we're on there, is I cannot type at all. You guys will learn that about me. Now, there's a great antibiotic resistance video here that depicts how this actually happens. Okay. I, so let's see what happens here. So here's the bacteria growing in the first band. Each of them are releasing chemicals that might. The loads of evidence is out there, guys, for evolution, and this is where genetics shows us in very rapid time. You know, I said 2 weeks sometimes, just very. Now, of course, this bacteria didn't become a new species; it became antibiotic resistant. Speciation is a whole different branch of evolutionary biology. As we think about that, genome is your library of genes. It's your genetic library. All the instructions you have to make individual things. And the study of this is called genomics. And genomics is a very important thing. One of the big areas that we have, for example, if you look at the Human Genome Project, and various new human genome projects that have happened, and you can go out there and look at it and study and actually go through. Now, this was a massive undertaking that began in a time really early, which is quite amazing. Now, so I always kind of urge people to go look at the human genome, and you can actually go through the whole genome and see what's going on. They have this stuff out there. And to be able to just see the different genes of the human genome and what happened, a great area of study. Now, so the Human Genome Project could be a great paper to do one of your topical papers on, for example. Again, your paper that you have to write has to be on something germane to our class. We talk about, so if we talk about genomics, you can do like something like human genome, proteomics, or something even more so going in to the, CRISPR, for example, is a great one to do. It's a little bit newer technology, been around a little bit now. But now proteomics, this is the study of the proteins and their properties. And we want to understand this, the proteome, understanding the entire set of proteins that we make. This takes supercomputers and large computers to do. Now, it does to study proteins and their structures and things like that. It doesn't just take supercomputers. For example, you can do this. You could go in and do folding at home. I do recommend it. Folding at Home is a citizen science software that you can join. You download it. It gives you a really cool looking screensaver, but it helps us understand. This is, instead of using supercomputers, we use everybody's laptops and desktops to act as a supercomputer. They send you pieces of data, and you do this for them. And I do recommend it. It's a really good way of doing this. And a good way of helping science. And they're also working with COVID-19 stuff as well. Epigenetics is a huge area. This would make a great paper. Is epigenetics would make a great paper, by the way, for your topical paper. You will hear me give you guys loads of great things of ideas to do your papers on throughout my lectures. So don't worry if you're like struggling. Something will potentially catch your interest. So proteome is a pretty cool area too. Now, energy flow. Energy flow is this idea that energy and matter are flowing through a universe. So we're going to talk about energy flow, and that life does require us to transfer matter and energy. Now, just think about that. You have to eat. You have to transfer matter from some living thing like a plant or an animal to your body, and you transfer the energy stored in that plant or animal matter, protein, to do stuff with it. Okay? That's metabolism. So energy flow. Now, energy flow, without it, it wouldn't matter. We wouldn't have anything to eat if it wasn't for this. Now, I'm going to say this, that if you think about on Earth, most of the energy that drives the stuff that happens on this planet comes from sunlight. Sunlight is the source of most energy on planet Earth. Now, not all of it. Of course, there's deep ocean thermal vents that have chemical and thermal energy that drives the metabolism for those organisms down in the deep ocean. But solar energy, light, comes in, and producers like photosynthetic trees, they take that light energy in, they produce chemical energy in terms of plant matter. An animal like what we would say is a primary consumer, an herbivore eats it, and then a predator eats the herbivore, and so that food gets transferred. Now, when we do this, plants actually produce a little heat when they do photosynthesis. And then if they make chemical energy and I eat that, I produce some heat when I convert chemical energy to energy for me. So if I go eat something, I will produce my body heat from that. So there is always heat lost, and then what we do is we recycle these nutrients. I defecate, I urinate, or I might die, and the chemistry that is inside there will be released and be recycled and all come back and reused again. Okay, in this. And throughout that, heat is always lost, energy is always lost in the form of heat. That'd be something we'll talk about is like the second law of thermodynamics. You're always losing energy. Now, interactions, and this is our last one we'll do. And it's the first one I'm going to draw something and talk about it. But interactions are crucial amongst ecosystems, amongst individuals. There's a lot of interactions. Homeostasis is one of the critical ones. And then what's about how animals interact with their environment? But it's a big one. Now, I'll talk more about that in Bio 2 when I talk about, is it chapter 40, I want to say it is, in Bio 2. But that'll be a thing we'll talk about. Now, as we get into this, guys, animals, we do this, but let's talk about homeostasis. And this is a very important thing. So let's talk about this. And I'm going to use some examples here. Now, let's say that in a room, let's say 75 degrees Celsius is the temperature that we thought would be perfect for a room that we're in. We said 75 degrees. That is the perfect temperature. Now, to do this, to keep this that way, we have the AC. And what you're going to see, let's say 75 degrees is what we want it on. And it's hot outside. The temperature starts to warm up. Okay. AC comes on. And the temperature will start to cool off. Okay. So AC goes off. And then it starts to heat back up again. And then, it's too hot. AC on. Temperature starts to drop back down again. It gets cool enough. The AC goes off. Okay. And then it heats up again. And we just cycle like this. Now, if you think about this, the AC came on and went off throughout different times of the day. Now, in between here, we have this kind of fluctuation here. Okay, we have these fluctuations where this temperature fluctuated. But on average, we would say that probably average temperature was average 75 degrees F. 75 degrees Celsius is dang hot. I mean, that's hot. Sorry. So let's say we decided that 75 degrees Celsius was perfect temperature for a room. Okay. Fahrenheit. Why do I keep? I'm so used to using Celsius, but I am so sorry that I keep doing that. It's just the way my brain is tuned, and I know that we like. And the reason I'm using this is AC units, HVAC units. They use Fahrenheit scale, and I always have to tell myself that. I'm used to using Celsius, and I mean 75 degrees Celsius. That's pretty hot. What is that? By the way, is let's see, 35 C2F. I mean, that's 167 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot. Okay, so okay. I know it's hot. I'm not good at converting those in my head on the spot. But so let's say it's what's happening. Okay, this is homeostasis. On general, we are there and we are in balance. Now, what I want to help us understand is how do we keep it in balance? Well, we're going to see something called feedback. Okay. And what I want to do, I'll have to use this green. I don't have the other green that I usually use. Okay, so let's go and take a look at this. So homeostasis is an internal steady state that living things have. We can maintain an internal or a constant internal standing state. We might say standing steady. Okay. Now, what is it that changes homeostasis? Is a stimulus. A stimulus is the change in anything that's being regulated. Now, there's two types of ways to regulate and maintain homeostasis in a self-regulating living system. Is called feedback. Now, negative versus positive feedback is very hard to understand at first. Now, what I'm going to do is let's use blue for a stimulus. Now, let's say I have a stimulus can go up or down. Stimuli could increase, they could decrease. The stimulus can go up and down. Okay? Now, if the stimulus goes up, let's say that the blood pressure increases, and my body's like, nope, I want my blood pressure to go back down to homeostasis, homeostatic range. This would be a body's response. Now, notice in this case, the stimulus and the body's response go opposite. So if blood pressure goes up and the body responds to lower blood pressure back down to homeostasis, we are reducing that. And if blood pressure drops and the body responds to raise it back to homeostasis, we are saying, guys, this is a type of feedback called a negative feedback. Okay? In negative feedback, the stimulus and the body's response always go opposite. We would say this always brings us back to homeostasis. It negates the stimulus. Negates the stimulus. Okay? It always negates the stimulus, as you can see here. Now, what if in the other case, here I am at homeostasis. Let's say the stimulus went up. And the body says, let's make it worse. Let's respond to make it even worse. Or in this case, let's make it go even lower. Now, right here will be the more common one. But notice that this gets it worse. It's taking it away from homeostasis. We're moving away from homeostasis. We might say we are pushes to completion. Okay? We might say this pushes me to completion. I cannot spell sometimes. I am sorry. Pushes me to completion, okay? Now, what I want to help you guys understand is this is making it worse before it gets better. This is called a positive feedback. Positive feedback pushes to completion. Negative feedback negates, okay, the stimulus. So in positive feedback, it always gets worse before it gets better. Now, in case right here, this is the more common one. Let's think childbirth, that a woman begins to have contractions. And that pushes the baby into the cervix. The cervix stretching causes an increase in contractions, which pushes the baby into the birth canal, which stretches the cervix more, which causes an increase in contractions. And you get this constant positive feedback loop that it gets worse before it gets better until the baby is delivered. It just pushes to completion. Okay? Now, right here is the one, of course, you're going to really want to know is that one in this, that it goes. But remember, stimulus and body's response go opposite. Stimulus and body's response go same directions, okay, in positive feedback. So positive versus negative feedback can be described by the relationship of the stimulus and the way the body responds, okay? Big, 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 okay? Now, so when we think about negative, the stimulus and the body's response go opposite directions. We say it decreases disturbance, so I always say this, it negates the stimulus. We would say this always brings us back to homeostasis. Now, positive feedback always makes things more. Now, here is a great example. This can be used in blood clotting. For example, if this product here goes back to acts as an enzyme to stimulate the enzyme to make more blood clotting proteins, right here is another good example of a positive feedback. That more Z simulates the production of more Y, which will lead to the production of more Z, which will simulate the production of more Y, which will lead to more Z. Chugga, 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 chugga. This is a more common version. And something that we want to see. Now, here's some examples of these with negative feedback, like blood pressure, oxygen levels, thirst. If your blood pressure drops, your body wants to raise it. If your oxygen level drops, your body wants to raise it. If your water levels drop, your body wants to raise it. Now, milk production, you always, until the stimulus is removed, makes things work. Like baby is nursing and suckling, at least in humans, you're going to try to make milk until baby's done feeding. Now, not every animal makes and produces milk in the same particular way. It's why it's actually kind of hard to milk camels. You're like, why do you know that? There's a zoo nearby here, and one of my students worked for the zoo, and I got to learn about milking camels. That was fun. I take advantage of every learning opportunity I ever can get my hands on, because if you can't learn throughout your entire life, you're not educated. So fever, your body keeps getting hotter and hotter until you get rid of it. This is why, though, it can kill you. So we want to take something that can help us with a virus or bacteria, antibiotics, antivirals, something like that, monoclonal antibodies, something like that. Now, Regeneron, that is not the same. Get vaccinated. Okay, that's another great example of the Regeneron thing. It's another good one to look at, because it's fairly new, dealing with COVID. So here's a great example: is insulin production. Your beta cells, insulin producing cells. When you have high blood sugar, that will cause you to produce insulin, which will lower the sugar, which will, when the sugar goes back down, we turn off insulin production. And that's a great example of negative feedback. When blood sugar is high, we release insulin to lower that sugar. When the blood sugar goes back low, we turn off the insulin production. There's a very fascinating mechanism to control that. I do have a video on that if you're interested. Theme 4 is the last place we will go today, and this is our last slide for the day, is that animals interact with their environment. Now, animals interact with their environment, and they also interact with other individuals. For example, predators and prey, parasite and host, herbivore and plant. So these interactions are sometimes beneficial. Sometimes they're harmful. Sometimes they're good to one, harmful to the other. Sometimes they benefit both. So they may be beneficial to one or both. They may be harmful to one or both. Think about like a parasite benefits, I am harmed. A mutualistic thing like the gut bacteria benefits from having a home, and I benefit from getting things from them. They make essential vitamins for me. I give them a home. They give me vitamins, and they help me digest. They help me do other things. And we interact with physical and biological things to affect what can live there. That is the reason why certain animals live in certain places, is the environmental, physical, and biological factors that are present are necessary for them. Okay, and we're always working with that, and sometimes those factors change and we have local extinctions. Those animals can no longer live there because the local environment no longer allows for it. Most of all the animals who've ever lived on planet Earth are extinct. About 96% roughly of all animals who have ever lived are extinct. So, extinction is the rule, not the exception. So, all right, guys. So this does conclude. We're going to pick up with theme 5 in the next one, and we'll do theme 5, and then we'll talk about science. So this concludes our first one. Remember, after the completion of chapter 1, there will be a quiz. Check the calendars for those. There is always I will announce the quiz. There always will be a week, and I will announce their due dates as soon as I finish the chapter. Okay, guys, thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.